All right, everyone. Welcome to the Urbanist Lunch and Learn with Ron Davis, where we're going to learn more about Ron's platform, especially his mobility platform and housing platform for District 4 Seattle. This is sort of taking the place of a mobility forum we had planned with the other candidates, but we couldn't make that happen, had to reschedule, couldn't get a date that worked for everyone. But still wanted to definitely hear what Ron had in mind for this race. He has a really detailed platform, and we'd love to really dig into it here today. So we are recording this for folks who can't make it. We just shared the news that the Urbanist Elections Committee did endorse Ron. We were able to hear enough in our endorsement interview with Ron earlier, but we definitely want to share more because we don't publish those interviews. But this will be there for folks to kind of really get familiar with what Ron stands for. So I will hand it over to Ron to kind of introduce that, and then we'll kind of get into some specific topics.
That sounds great. Thank you, Doug. And thank you so much. That endorsement means the world to me. I'm an avid Urbanist reader and booster, and I write sometimes for it. And so this makes me very excited. So a little bit about me. I'm Ron Davis. I live with my wife, who's a family physician and executive, and our two rascally little boys in Roosevelt, right on the border with Ravenna and the U District. I didn't start life in a place like Roosevelt, though. I'm the product of a teen pregnancy. When my dad quit his job at a diner for a factory with benefits, he earned minimum wage. It took him like 10 years before he didn't have to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week just for us to make ends meet. But bad as that was, at least back then, my parents were able to buy us a house in an okay neighborhood and build us a beautiful, stable life. We were able to build on that, and I ended up graduating from Harvard Law School and developing skills as a deal maker in enterprise sales and tech startups. The reason I'm running is you can't launch a journey like mine in Seattle today. People are working 80 hours now just to survive, and they never get ahead. Certainly aren't buying houses. So I'm running to make sure that everyone gets a real shot like I did, and to make sure that when people's luck runs short, we take care of them, because it could happen to any of us. And that happens to show up in a very urbanist platform, because housing affordability is really the key to access to building that future life.
Yeah, thank you for that quick introduction. You're getting very good at that after several months on the trail. But yeah, we want to especially hit on mobility, since this was going to be a mobility forum. And I don't know if your excellence on this issue partially, I don't know, scared off some of the opponents, or just they were busy. I won't say for certain what that one is. But I also think we can do something interesting here, because I know in some of these forums, the whole goal is to get candidates to take a stance out of their shell. But I've noticed in talking to you that you're not in the doing the dance quite as often as some of the other candidates. You'll usually just say where you are at an issue up front, and try to, if it's a somewhat controversial stand, you'll explain the values that kind of get you there. And I think that's a really important thing for candidates, being upfront and also thinking about how to take those values into action.
Yeah, I think I will just add,
Yeah.
We'll find out if it's a strength or a weakness. It's something I appreciate in politicians myself when they're clear. And so I try to be clear too. And, there's not that many politicians who are clear. So we'll see how I do.
Yeah, so when we were, as a coalition, trying to write the questions for the forums, we're thinking about a million different things about how to kind of get candidates to be like, well, how, you say you have these values about helping people walking, biking, rolling, in transit, get around. But when push comes to shove, and it's against a car project, or parking or something like that, there was all these questions getting at, will you prioritize, human-centered, active mobility over cars? And instead of having to write a bunch of those here, I thought I would just ask you kind of, because how you'll think about it in a project basis. Obviously, we still need to provide mobility for people in cars, but how to provide that safe access for other folks who really don't have great bike, walk, transit options sometimes.
Yeah, so there's a lot of layers to this. So first, I will say, you're right. Cars are part of the equation. They're not going away anytime soon. We're a very transit-oriented family, but among the four of us, we do share one car. We try to use it as little as we can, but I do understand that, and I'm not trying to go to war on it. But when I do think about priorities as our city matures, and that tends to mean that more people live here, and we are out of space on the roads, and cars are the least efficient use of space. They also happen to pollute the most. They're noisy, they run people over. And so, as we think about how to get people around the city, we do have to start to think more smartly about it. In terms of how we do that, I mean, obviously there's a million layers to this, so maybe we can pick them apart. But I think about our neighborhoods first. So before we think about moving from neighborhood to neighborhood, we should also think about satisfying people's needs in their neighborhood. So you often hear this term 15-minute city. Different jurisdictions use different terms. I'm particularly impressed by Barcelona's goal to get 85% of trips to stay in neighborhood within the next 5 years. Now, Barcelona is denser than us and has been doing mixed use for a long time. So I don't think we can hope for quite to be that ambitious that fast. But I do think intentionally legalizing retail in neighborhoods without having to bulldoze those neighborhoods to build parking, and doing so in a way that strategically makes sure that the vast majority of trips can be satisfied on foot or maybe on a bike by people of all abilities is the first thing, right? We prevent trips, right? Most people don't like driving, and while I do prefer riding on the train and listening to a book on tape or a podcast, I also really prefer walking just around the corner and satisfying my needs. So I think that's my first priority, is making sure our neighborhoods are complete. Second priority then is thinking about how we get around between our neighborhoods, right? And so something I often say on the stump is I think we need to make it as quick, easy, safe, and convenient to get around the city without a car as it is with one. And that sounds kind of sweet and anodyne, but the truth is that's a pretty radical proposition. Right now, we place an enormous time tax on people if they want to get around without a car, especially if it's east-west. I mean, it can be really brutal. Honestly, again, north south, a lot of different ways. I've just you get stuck. And then there are other taxes too. There's a tax on your safety because when you're a pedestrian, you're more vulnerable. We have public safety issues on our buses. So the bus drivers union actually endorsed me because I have an actionable public safety plan for addressing that they think is deliverable, right? So we have to get all of these pieces right, and to do that, that involves things that we can dive into more deeply, but it involves complete gridded networks, basically, of bike lanes that are protected by firm barriers, so they go from where you are to where you want to be and back, and you can do so safely. And the same thing with transit, where we need increased frequencies, but we also know that transit's never going to be as convenient as whatever is sitting in your driveway. And so if you want to get rid of that time penalty, it means you need to do things like paint bus lanes so that it can skip some traffic to actually get them to be real choices. And once people start to have real choices and they don't pay those penalties, they shift modes because it's cheaper to drive without a car and you can listen to something or take a call, and people prefer that.
Yeah, thanks for laying that out. And I think those are great values. And it's always interesting then to put those in the real world and in real projects. And I know you've dug into some of the ones that really impact your district. And I'm thinking of something like a Rapid Ride J, which if folks haven't learned the alphabet, I don't expect you to yet. It would take the Route 70 and upgrade it to a Rapid Ride project. It's sort of truncated from what it was original vision. Used to go all the way to Roseville, but would now kind of end probably in the district. But anyway, that was originally that's a Move Seattle project. It's apparently still happening, but it's on a later, like 2027-ish timeline. And the current, I thought I'd bring it up because it's a contrast with the current holder of the D4 City Council seat, Transportation Chair Alex Peterson, has been looking at ways to water that down, if not cancel that project, because of it included bike lanes in Eastlake, which you trade a little bit of parking for a safe bike route for folks to get from the university to downtown and parts in between in Eastlake. And obviously urbanists are kind of excited about that trade-off, but it's, as far as the Alex Peterson base, not as much. So what do you think of that project? Is there any way to, you think realistically, to make sure we either get that on time or speed it up?
Yeah, so there's a lot of layers to this. First, maybe about Alex and the bike lane in Eastlake. I think Alex is deeply confused about how cities work. So while he wouldn't, I think anyway, he wouldn't allow a neighborhood to veto power lines or sewer lines coming through from neighborhood to neighborhood. For some reason, he does think a neighborhood should have a veto on connecting neighborhoods to one another that are on either side of it, right? And so the problem is we can't have a city if we don't have networked services like power lines, like pipes, like roads, like bike lanes. And so the idea that 50 neighbors are upset and should be able to stop the mobility of thousands and thousands of people in Northeast Seattle who might want to access downtown by a bike is foolish, both from just a pure utilitarian, like who counts? There's a lot more people that are impacted, but also foolish in that, once again, it continues to be an inefficient and unsafe use of the space. In terms of the project itself, yes, the J line does feel like it's been on this like slow death from a thousand cuts. It was called the Roosevelt Rapid Ride at one point, but they've had to rename it in part because they're not sending it to Roosevelt. There is a person or two inside SDOT who has opposed that project from the beginning. And I've had some folks at SDOT come to me and tell me about this. And they have done their best to kill it or water it down. And Alex has been somewhat complicit in that. And that's been really disappointing. So, for me, we need redundancy with Link. We need easy access to light rail as well. And rapid rides are just an extremely efficient way to move people. And so I would be much more inclined to protect a lane for the buses, provide the sort of easy access loading and unloading and payment that Rapid Ride provides in shelters. And I'd actually like to see it go all the way to Northgate. But one way or another, I do think it should be restored and go to Roosevelt. And yeah, that does mean trade-offs with car lanes. Now, what you do end up getting is substantially more mobility, more people moving through the same corridor faster. That data is very clear. You might have fewer cars moving through that corridor fast, although even sometimes when you actually make these changes, that doesn't happen as well. So it depends. But one way or another, you're going to get more people moving faster. And look, here in Northeast Seattle, like especially the part that would run through, we're fairly urbanized. Like many people are living without a car. That would prevent a lot of unnecessary trips.
Absolutely, yeah. And U District's one of the fastest growing parts of the city. Lots of residential towers going up near the campus, and that's credit to the mandatory housing affordability upzones making that possible. But yeah,
and I will add, it's going nuts. And then also same with Roosevelt. We are in 7 years. So Puget Sound Regional Council gave us this is how fast you'll grow over the next 20 years. And at 7 years, we'd almost doubled our 20-year target, right? So this part of the city is going nuts and it's urbanizing, and our thinking around it is still very suburban. Our planners thinking around it, and it really needs to catch up.
Yeah, and one of the complicating factors for policymakers and advocates is that that was a Move Seattle promise. There's 7 corridors that were kind of called Rapid Ride Plus, and luckily that one isn't dead. It's still progressing. But the timeline of it's going to be, we haven't delivered that yet, but we're going to be asking voters to approve another levy next year as the old one expires, because so much of the Seattle Department of Transportation budget is dependent on these levies.
Yes.
So which makes us dependent on the goodwill of voters to continue supporting them. And obviously meeting those promises could ensure the better chance of success.
Yeah, I mean, the theory of change is that if you deliver when you go to voters and you ask them for their money, you should deliver as much as possible. And obviously there are constraints, and yes, costs went up, and we've all been shocked by how much inflation has gone up, and some of that, like I to be fair to the folks involved, but we often either overpromise and underdeliver, or just figure someone else in the future can deal with the problem. And I think that really hampers our ability to win over voters. I also would love to back up and just say Rapid Ride is awesome, and I'm a huge fan of it. But I also think, like, if you're thinking of like an S curve of value and things you can do, paint a damn bus lane and just move all the buses in the corridor much faster. And it's not that expensive to do that. And you don't have to do all the signalized changes, all the loading and unloading changes, and you get, 70, 80% of the value. So I also think in the meantime, we should be, the term is often tactical urbanism for these sort of smaller changes. Mm-hmm. I do think we need to be, if we run short on money, we still need to deliver most of the value to voters rather than trying to let perfect be the enemy of the good and a bunch of projects.
I sound automated. I am not a message. I'm a real person. Hi, Helen. How are you?
There we
All
go.
right,
Got
sorry about
got
that.
that mute in there. Good work. Was that clear? So basically, there's a shortcut way, and it's painting lines. So when we fall short, we still need to deliver. Sorry, it's painting lanes. There is a shortcut when we are running short on money. And I think canceling a whole bunch of projects isn't the best way to do it. And I do think in this next levy, we do need to go bigger, but also I think we need to be picking strategic corridors like that, where we're like, maybe, we need to be realistic about costs. And so if we can't deliver a rapid ride, we need to be honest about it, but we still need to be shifting our use of right away to more efficient spaces, to more efficient use of space, excuse me.
Yeah, and that's definitely exciting. Not have to have everything have a 5 to 10 year planning build up to get a fairly what in some cities would be commonplace change. That I think is going to be healthy as far as getting momentum rather than everything being a tooth and nail fight. One project that got a few blocks of bus lanes was the Route 44,
Just
which was,
thinking of that.
yeah. Did
Yeah.
you think they went far enough, or would you like to see?
No, they should have gone at least to. I think they should have gone at least to 17th or 20th. Ideally, it would have just dropped all the way down. Gone 45th all the way down to U Village, and then I'd of course, like to see it crossing the bridge and going deep into Wallingford as well. Yeah, and I think a lot of people would. A lot of people ride that line. It's miserably slow, but it's a workhorse for our district, and because it's connected to light rail essentially, you've got a massive corridor with a lot of people along it that would get much faster, easier access to getting over to Link and being able to head north or south. So it seems to me like strategically extremely valuable. And I will say that like the throughput of cars on that corridor is awful, right? Because there's a light every 5 seconds. So if you're gonna prioritize getting people around, that would be a great low hanging fruit thing to expand. And it should be going the other direction too. It shouldn't just be one direction.
For sure, and that is sort of the key crosstown bus in your district. But obviously, there's been a little bit of news lately about the Route 8 and maybe some changes coming out. That it's very early, but the Route 8's sort of the poster child of late buses. Obviously, it's been the late 8 forever, but we're seeing now with the sort of pandemic, maybe slight respite we got from traffic congestion. It's roaring back with a vengeance. Especially as more people are going into the office in South Lake Union. But the Route 8 was miserably late over the past few weeks, and people were complaining about it online. And don't say whining on Twitter never got anyone anywhere. It sounds like SDOT's working on something there. What type of thing do you think should be on the table there? Is it similar to the Route 44? How can SDOT become more nimble in situations like this where suddenly the bus is just not a reliable option for people?
I have a better answer to the second question than the first because I have been so intensely at the doors the
Yeah.
last few weeks that I haven't been paying as much attention to the recent debacle with Route 8. So I'd have to go back and look at the specifics. But as a general rule, right, I think something I've really appreciated about our new SDOT director is that he does understand that there are small tactical changes that you can do that you can offer that make a big difference. I think he's somebody who would be fairly easy to sell on paint over some complete rebuild. And so I think that's a great example of a way we could get a lot of bang for our buck fast while starting to work toward a longer term plan. And we'd be setting ourselves up to do it because people would go through the emotional shift of maybe handing over some right of way and then all of a sudden see all these mobility benefits, and then we would just be upgrading those benefits. So that would be my sort of standard answer to that. Obviously, we also have a problem with staffing right now, and that's a very tough problem. And so building that pool of workers is going to take some time, and we do have to be realistic about that. I would say, kind of in terms of how we build that capacity, I think something that, for instance, I know Greg is doing at SDOT is he's hiring for a new, very, very senior position that reports into him. And it used to be called senior traffic engineer, and now it's like senior traffic safety and mobility or something. He's restacked the job description. He's not just the name, but also like the KPIs that they report. And they're really starting to move their focus to safety. They obviously have a long way to go and have a lot to say about Vision Zero. But I think that kind of fundamental rework where what people are responsible for at the top will make a big difference. And it just happens to turn out that things that make us safe also make neighborhoods nicer, get better throughput, and make things like buses not fall apart on the job, right? I'm sorry, not the bus like its actual mechanically fall apart, but routes route to Beckles. So, and actually, I actually want to back out and say something that I think it's worth thinking about.
Mhm.
So, we as urbanists, we often talk about, okay, we need to shift lanes, we need to do this, but I think stepping back and just recognizing like we have an enormous asset in this city, which is our right of way. It takes up so much space in our city, and it's sometimes frustrating because we're looking out and right now it's a sea of cement that's inefficiently used and drives a lot of runoff and people get hurt, but it is an enormous asset. It is an opportunity to get people around the city safely, to increase mobility for people who have mobility issues, to increase quality of life, to rebuild our tree canopy. Like that is a big public asset that we need to think about as something that we can build upon. And all these things we're talking about are ways to make it more efficient, more safe, get people around more effectively, right? That is an enormous asset. It's not just a problem to fix. It's actually something we bring to the table. Can you imagine if we had to acquire all that land? We would be completely screwed. So.
Yeah, and it's something that's coming up time and again, whether that's, trying to figure out how to increase our tree canopy, or where to site our light rail stations that is both, efficient, cost effective, and good for riders. Yeah, let's pivot over to Sound Transit a little bit, because some of those big decisions might ultimately get punted into the next city council's plate as well, at least on a potentially just at a late stage where they just have to give it a up or down as far as land use approvals and everything. But hopefully some steering happening ahead of time. Anyway, I'm getting a little into the weeds, but how do you think the SC3 planning is going so far? And what would be the kind of feedback that you would be giving to Sound Transit, should you be either just on the council or even on a Sound Transit board member?
I think the voters did a fantastic job in selecting sites for Sound Transit or representative sites. And I think the planning apparatus and the board is screwing it up really badly. Now, there are a few people on the board like Claudia Balducci who are perennially brilliant and saying all the right things and pushing for all the right things. But we have a governance problem, which is Sound Transit is governed by a bunch of jurisdictions, a number of which don't even really want rail or certainly don't have the need for it because they're much more farther flung. So we do have just the basic setup of that is very frustrating. And it has enabled some really foolish behavior, kind of classic penny wise pound foolishness. So sort of backing up, one of my volunteers worked for Sound Transit for years, and he was in the room when they were making a decision about escalators. And he remembers the discussion and people saying, the escalators, this kind is cheaper, and they won't break unless people walk up them. And in Seattle, people don't walk up and down escalators, so we'll be fine. And other people said, if we become a city that commutes by escalator, people will walk. They do it everywhere else. We should buy the more robust ones. And they said, nah, let's save the money. And we've all been living with those consequences ever since. To me, that is a microcosm of the foolish decisions we are seeing. That place stations where people aren't, which is nuts, and where people are unlikely to be anytime soon, or where there's a strong, powerful, constituency in favor of not developing. So like, let's say into industrial lands, and I support preserving our industrial lands. And there's also a very organized set of folks who want to prevent, moving a bunch of housing into industrial lands. And when we say, oh, let's put an industrial land, it's cheaper. Well, that's great, but then it's a ride to nowhere. And so just like we don't need bridges to nowhere, we don't need trains to nowhere, and especially we don't need $50 billion trains to nowhere. So I'm a tech CEO, and I was perfect for testing user testing products because I'm really bad at figuring stuff out that's kind of basic and technical. And the same thing is true of transit. I see these seams because I just get frustrated and trip over myself. And when I have to cross a big road with my kids, when the wayfinding is unclear, when it's out of range, I get super frustrated. And I am 43 and mobile, and I'm a distance runner. And what about people that actually have challenges getting around, or who don't feel safe crossing a street, or can't do it as fast? So to me, this is nuts. If we're gonna drop billions of dollars on building assets, they need to be assets that will serve our community for 100 years. So very specifically, that means like we should be connecting people in the CID, not doing the north and south of the CID. Like Ballard should be in Ballard. We should make sure that when we're locating transit in South Lake Union, it's where the people in South Lake Union are. We should not be deleting stations, especially some of the highest traffic stations. The whole idea is to get people to write it, not to be able to draw a line on a map.
Amen. And unfortunately, that seems to be the direction that the Sound Transit Board is drifting. So it definitely will take some course correction with Mayor Harrell, so far backing some of these options that do end up losing entire stations, including this new option for Denny Way that ends up consolidating it with Salt Lake Union, as you alluded to. Check out
some of the densest census tracts on the West Coast, right? Like
Yeah.
just like First Hill was, just like extremely frustrating.
And it gets Uptown effectively a second station due to put a station at Aurora. It's where all the buses are. It's certainly a strange idea to take that particular station out of play when there's over 10,000 daily riders projected there. So that's our little soapbox on some SC3 planning, but a lot of other issues to cover as well. So I will keep it moving. Let's talk about another kind of thorny issue that has the potential to provide some help as far as safety, but obviously has its own set of challenges, which is camera enforcement. There is some hope that will improve on another number of levels, including there's some cameras that are allowed to enforce bus lanes within the urban core of Seattle, thanks to a pilot program approved by the state. It also helps with blocking the blocks, which is when motorists drive into the crosswalk and prevent people from crossing in the crosswalk as designed. Think of Mercer Street and you'll think of that problem. The city's rolled that out very minimally so far. And there's also talk of expanding the school zone cameras that we use, and this is from about 35 right now to double it. And that's a proposal from Councilmember Alex Peterson. But there's some uncertainty of how that will work because it's sort of unclear what the goal of that expansion is. So some advocates, including some organized into roads called Whose Streets Are Streets, have raised concerns with that because they're worried that it's just going to sort of over police the south end and create sort of echoing impact. So anyways, that's a quick rundown of the current controversy of camera enforcement. Do you see a way forward that can use camera enforcement, which does have the benefit of not involving an armed officer, but avoiding some of the equity pitfalls so that we can have safer routes to school, have better bus lanes that don't have cheaters in them, and so forth?
Yes, so I am for more camera enforcement for the reasons, some of the reasons you mentioned. I'll add, like, we do know that although it's only part of the puzzle for slowing traffic down and not killing people, it does work. It is part of that puzzle, and so we need to be doing that to protect people. I'm also for it because we're down 362 sworn officers, and so we have trouble showing up to 911 calls right now. And so cops don't need to be chasing people down for going 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. I understand if someone's driving recklessly and they're an imminent risk, but otherwise we could get them out of traffic enforcement. And that does happen to be the source of a ton of inequitable policing, right? So there's a bunch of data around this. Traffic stops tend to escalate, and we see real unfortunate racialized bias in that kind of policing. So that's a fantastic option to start to essentially specialize. Your point about equity is a well-taken one, because, for instance, many of the roads we have the most speeding on are run through marginalized neighborhoods, which is no accident. We've been forcing marginalized communities to live along those big, busy, scary, deadly roads for years through our zoning practices. So if we're going to try to really tackle the problem, we're going to end up putting cameras on those roads, and then those communities will be over-enforced in. So I think the answer is yes, we do need cameras. We need them in a lot more places. We also need to set up an independent governance mechanism. Probably, I would think I would be inclined to work with the ACLU on this, that has done some interesting critiques of camera enforcement inequities. And we would need to set some kind of core key performance indicators to make sure that we stay in an equitable place. It would be very surprising to me if we couldn't do better than human enforcement at this point, though. And it would just allow us to make city streets safer all over the city, right? And I think the idea of backing out from schools, starting from parks, these tend to be actually located in wealthier neighborhoods. You're less likely to have the equity issues, partly because we've once again built the city in a way that inconveniences marginalized communities. But it would give us the opportunity to protect groups of people that are very sympathetic to kids, of course, as a parent, me too, and we're less likely to end up over policing BIPOC communities.
Yeah, I think that does seem like there's a way, the way to thread that needle. So thanks for walking us through that. Let's shift gears over to housing, because I don't want to shortchange that discussion either. I know you have a lot of thoughts about housing. You've been a proponent of kind of going big on the Seattle comprehensive plan so that there is enough housing for everyone. And there's currently 5 alternatives in the plan, including the no change alternative, but you've been talking about alternative 6. So walk us through that and what your thinking is behind how we set our growth strategy as we set this big reset next year that the council is going to get to determine and have a huge impact on a number of things, including housing opportunities.
Yeah, I do have a lot to say about this. So, like, as I mentioned earlier, when my parents bought their drafty house in an okay neighborhood, it was enough to change everything for us, right? There was no more worrying about rent hikes. We had security and stability and built relationships with our community. And my sister and I were able to build from that. And we also know from research, right, the stable housing in healthy neighborhoods is the bedrock for a thriving life. And so my goal is that our planning will make it so that Seattle is a place where people from any background can, raise a family, start a career, and age in their homes without breaking the bank. And we should be planning to that end. So first, we know that we are way behind. We have a deficit of tens of thousands of units, depending on if you look at how many people have moved into the region, how many jobs we've created, you get different numbers, but the number's very big. We've had these years and years of people who don't want housing in their backyard, abusing the power of our legal system to keep people from living near the largest job center for essentially 1,000 miles in every direction. 850 to San Francisco, but basically that, right? And on top of that, we've had these economists and housing experts say, hey, you keep doing this, your prices are going to skyrocket and you're going to push thousands of people on the street. And now we live in this unaffordable city with thousands of people on the street, and we're scratching our heads saying, well, how in the world did we get here? And how can we fix it? So I do think the comp plan is an opportunity to really start to address these. There are, as you mentioned, 5 options. I'm for option 6. The reason I'm for option 6 is none of the 5 options really makes any significant headway on the housing deficit. 4 of them clearly make it worse, and the 5th arguably makes it only slightly worse, maybe slightly better, but none of them dig us out. So if we're going to make a 10-year plan and we have a big old problem, we ought to be planning to fix things. So in the comp plan, this option 6 community, right, has been it's kind of a big tent. A lot of people sort of project their ideas onto it, but it's generally said something like, every neighborhood should have significant amounts of housing in it. This can be livable. It doesn't have to be, high rises. We can use things like lot coverage requirements to make sure there's still trees. But we need, human scale, significant, compact neighborhoods everywhere, and no neighborhood should be excluded from change. And by doing so, by the way, then that means other neighborhoods won't have to change overnight. Just add that in. So to me, that I want to work backwards from this plan and say, okay, exactly how many people, what are our likely growth trajectories, kind of, low, medium, high. What is our deficit, and how do we then, what are 3 plans, the low, medium, and high plan, to get us there? That's what we need to be doing. So of course that, as I mentioned, does mean upzoning all over the city. And then it also means being thoughtful about how to create more affordable housing. So if we catch up on our housing deficit, we will do a better job of serving the middle class and maybe even kind of the fledgling middle class. But at some point in a society as unequal as ours, with land as expensive as ours, we also know the market is not going to serve everybody. And so we do need to be upgrading our investments in affordable housing, social housing as well, right? So there's a lot of opportunity to do that through land banking, through raising more progressive taxes to invest more aggressively in affordable and social housing, through removing barriers to building it that add up to $50,000 a unit in many places. And so, those are sort of core for me. There's a bunch of stuff in the plumbing, like in how we build housing, the rules we set on it, silly things like upper level setbacks, or a bunch of rules about where housing goes on a lot that make it harder to build, more likely to cut down trees. I think we could get out of our own way on a lot of that, follow more the European model. Eliminate parking requirements and turn our permitting process from a 2 to 3 year dual track permitting process into a 6-month or less single track permitting process. So if we did that, I think we would start to actually see real progress on that housing deficit. Obviously, there's certain things we can't control, like interest rates, but over time, those should adapt.
Yeah, and it's really I'm glad you brought up the how to make sure that housing on paper actually comes to fruition, so people can live in housing instead of just say our neighborhood has enough planned capacity, even if it's not happening in actuality. I think it's pretty cool comfort for folks who are looking for a home. But one thing that I don't know if developers get into a sort of situation of the boy who cries wolf, but they're I get why they look at a lot of things as an added cost, but some of them have, obviously a little more public benefit and thought behind them, such as when we updated our building codes and efficiency
Yep.
standards in Seattle to provide greener housing. Obviously, that comes with a cost to developers. So to do that sort of makes sense. But then if you're doing death by a thousand cuts, there's other things that are less defensible, like why let the market decide how much parking there is, since that just ends up being passed along to the renter or homeowner anyway, and driving up the cost of housing. So I'm glad
And
you're thinking
reducing
about
the
this.
amount of housing, which drives up the cost of housing elsewhere. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Look, I don't think every obligation we put on developers is bad. In fact, I have a lot that I want to be putting on them. I actually want to be, continuing to turn the screws on those green building standards. But if we're going to do that means, and we want housing to be affordable, means we need to at least get rid of the dumb rules. And the good news is there's a lot of them. So that's that. Obviously, yes. I'm not into just giving developers what they want. I'm into eliminating silly rules that increase the cost of housing. And in some cases, we'll be able to offset that by ratcheting up the really good ones, right? So.
Yeah, and sometimes these are in conflict. So I definitely get sometimes the frustration where an upper level setback, as you rightfully point out, not a great idea. Because generally, if you want your house to have good thermal performance, be efficient, not be expensive to heat, you don't want a bunch of weird shapes in it. Like a rectangle will generally do pretty well. So
Harder to do mass timber
yeah.
construction that way. There's a million, walk around a million gorgeous European cities or East Coast cities or Montreal or whatever, or even some of the parts of this city. And most of those buildings do not have upper level setbacks. It's one of those things where people thought about it and it seemed like it would be a good idea and it would do a lot for beauty. And I don't think it does. And it does a whole lot for, it creates a whole lot of other costs.
Yeah, it's pretty much not compatible with green buildings. So it sort of seems like one of those things that hopefully we can correct after it sort of being an MHA design by committee kind of thing that was seen as concession to people with the tomato plant next door or something. Obviously we want to try to meet all these goals, but some of these aren't compatible.
Yeah, and you just said a great thing, which is by committee. So realistically, threading the needle on all this policy stuff is hard, even in a sort of a ivory tower space. And then you've got to deal with all the constituencies and get things passed, right? So we're not going to do a perfect job, but I do think that good policy thinking can at least give us a true north that we're aiming at, instead of just aiming in the wrong direction while we're trying to build those coalitions.
Definitely. Yeah, let's talk about social housing a little bit more. You referenced it as being part of your goals, but obviously there's a huge opportunity in the city now that we have a public developer of social housing, a new public development authority that is, it's definitely still on the ground floor, but there's this entity now tasked with building social housing. It's looking for a funding source. But that would be a new model, a new way of doing things, because usually Seattle is either all or nothing market or affordable housing currently, occasionally some hybrid models, but this would be the most hybrid model yet, where you're getting some moderate income housing up to 120% of area median income, that would, if all goes according to plan, cross-subsidize some of the affordable housing that's below 60% of AMI, and some gradation in there too, potentially. It's flexible. Do you think this is something that can be contributing soon, and how would you look to get it up and running efficiently?
Yeah. So one is, I was the only person in my race who, as far as I can tell, supported this. Kenneth Wilson did not. Maritza Rivera at our 43rd Dems forum said she didn't know what I-135 was. So I don't know if she supports it or not. So it's a little unclear there. But I advocated for this beforehand because I do think it's a great idea. It's not perfect, but it is a great idea. We don't have a ton of US based examples. We do have one, and it does seem to be pretty capital efficient because, as you said, Doug, the higher income units subsidize the lower income units. So always love a way to stretch a buck because there's a limited number of them out there. So I like that. I, of course, the idea of mixed income buildings, just like mixed income neighborhoods, is great. And there's a bunch of research on that. It's better for upward mobility. It's better for social cohesion. It means that we're not concentrating poverty in places, which has all kinds of negative effects. So I love that. I also like that it provides a new revenue potential source for revenue, which is our bonding authority. So we can build earlier because the earlier you can build, the better, because construction costs go up faster than inflation, and then taxes are gathered. So we need to do that too. So happy about all the above. How fast can we build up the administrative capacity? Of course, depends a little bit on the executive side, which is always a challenge. I do think funding is going to be part of that, though. And I think it needs to be provided significant funding, both for its administrative capacity and just to get started, right? So on top of being able to use bonds, I do think it needs some significant seed money. So the sort of advocate community is calling for 20 to 30 million a year to really get that going. And I do think we need to do that. And we have a lot of options now because we've got a more permissive Supreme Court than we've had in the past to actually do more progressive revenue generation to do that. So we're not gutting other affordable housing sources. So I'm 100% for that.
And you meant state Supreme Court, in case anyone's confused.
Oh yeah, not the other one. No, God. Sorry. Yes, thank you.
I knew what you meant.
State Supreme Court, not them. I don't know.
No one has warm fuzzies right now for the.
No. Yeah, sorry. I shouldn't even laugh. It's gallows humor. They're terrible.
Yeah.
So no, but our state Supreme Court has been, I would say, like winking at us repeatedly, saying, so just for those who don't know, we have this rule in our Constitution. It makes it so that our property taxes have to be flat. And in the 30s, there was a state Supreme Court that said, hey, income is property. And this made it so we can't mostly have not been able to have progressive taxes in Washington state. And it's been brutal, but we had some very creative policymakers who figured out ways to punch holes in that. And they've passed taxes like Jumpstart that have gone up through the courts and been successful. And now our most recent capital gains tax at the state level. And so there's a template there that I think we can build on for raising more progressive revenue. And, that's not soaking the rich right now. We are the most upside down, or one of the most upside down now with those past states in the country in terms of how much we take from the poor versus how much we take from the rich to fund our taxes. So I think there's great opportunity there, real low-hanging fruit for stabilizing our revenue sources just for the basic general fund and for facing some of these, addressing some of these priorities like social housing.
Yeah, thank you.
If you want to get into revenue mechanisms, I can.
Let's do it. Yeah, you're kind of halfway there.
Yeah, I teed myself up.
Yeah, and we'll post your questionnaire soon, which has a good answer on this too, which I'm just taking a look at.
Yeah. I know what it says, so I can tell you.
Yeah. Talk about those. Plus, I'm curious, circling back to transportation source. There's sort of the impact fees thing that's in the discussion, but also there's this road pricing thing looming farther that sort of was a thing during the Durkan administration, but then disappeared. But now New York's actually doing it, so I don't know if there's some maybe we'll bring it back in Seattle. For long term, it seems like we're going to need that because gas is tax no longer going to be the revenue mechanism. So something's got to replace. But anyways, I'll let you get into it. With this added wrinkle of road pricing.
Yeah. So, all right, I'll address road pricing too. Now you want to make me sweat. That's a hard one. Not because of policy, but just because of politics. But I'll give you my straightforward answer. Okay, but first on revenue. So first, just a little bit of context. We get a lot of our annual revenue for this city from the real estate excise tax, which is a tax on real estate sales. Well, interest rates went up. There's not as many real estate sales. And so we are facing an enormous deficit in the coming years, on the order of about $200 million. And thinking about this, our general fund is like 1.6 billion. There's other money out there for capital projects and the utility, but that's the part that we really spend. So you're talking about a ton of money. On top of that, here we are, one of the richest cities in the history of human civilization, with some of the most upside down taxes, where the rich and corporations are getting off quite well. And our Chamber of Commerce just called for a $230-ish million holiday from Jumpstart, which is a teeny tiny tax on top incomes, roughly 1% to 2% on the very top incomes. So, so you put that together, and we're talking about blowing nearly a $500 million hole in our $1.6 billion general fund. So if you want a safe Seattle or a clean Seattle or a place where people aren't all having their mental health crises on the street, and if you think it feels bad right now, it could be a lot worse, or a place where people can afford their houses, or if you want a place where the buses run on time or at all, or where the potholes get filled ever, that is not an option, and we need to be serious about that. It's ridiculous. So sort of backing out on what to do. So right now, we do have this Jumpstart tax, which is this small tax on top incomes. There was a proposal this last budget session to expand it. When you're talking about a 1% to 2% tax on incomes, there's a ton of great work out of some of the top economics departments in the country on this. This stuff does not affect the local economy. It does not affect migration. It does. The Federal Reserve has said it does not affect startup creation. I mean, it's nothing, right? If you think about it, and you're a business owner, and you're like, should I locate in Seattle? You do have costs you're thinking about. Wow, it's 30% more expensive to pay someone here because housing's so damn expensive. And, it's 300% as expensive as an offshore employee or whatever. It turns out that businesses are not deciding based on 1%, 2%, 3%, or 4% taxes. It's just absurd. So we can grow that and get, 100 to 150 million bucks off the top. Next, I think we need to be putting parking fees in more places in the city. Right now, a lot of our parking is free. There's great work that's been done on the damage to cities that free parking creates, or free-ish parking. And we've been smart about this and applied some of this policy in the center of the city. We could do it in more places. And I actually think we need to be taxing open parking lots. And we should, and Doug, I'm generally against impact fees, but there is one kind of impact fee I do favor, and that is a fee on new parking spots, especially surface parking lots or open parking lots, because in a city that has very large external costs in terms of runoff, in terms of generating more traffic, and in terms of cost of housing. So I do think we should be charging those. So there's, I'm working with I can't say who, with somebody who's got some expertise on this, on figuring out exactly how much money we think we can generate from that one, but it's a lot. Next, and really my most favorite is we have been set up by the courts to be able to do a 1% income tax for quite some time. Now, 1% flat taxes suck, but they're still much more progressive than most of our taxes, which are, sales taxes, which fall much more heavily on the poor than the rich, or property taxes, which fall somewhat more heavily probably on the poor than the rich. There's some theoretical issues with that one, but one way or another, an income tax is better. And I have a theory, and it's not just a pet theory, because I've now sat down with one of the top state constitutional experts in the state, who very flatteringly said, I can't believe I never thought of that. So I have a theory about how we can raise substantially more money and make it more progressive while getting past our state Supreme Court, which is to simply say we have a tax that's 1% of your income minus $500. So what that means is if you make $50,000 a year, you pay nothing. If you make $30,000 a year, you get a $200 rebate. If you make nothing, you get a $500 rebate. Above, if you make more than 50,000, right, you might pay 100, 200. You make 100,000. Now you're paying $500. It goes up from there, right? What's cool about that is that raises like 300 million bucks, doesn't hurt the poor, actually sends a bunch of them a check and gives us the kind of money we need to do the kind of stuff we're talking about here, right? The ambitious projects we're talking about. And again, this is not a soak the rich, 1%. It's a teeny tiny tax. When you think about all of, sort of backing out, I think about Seattle, and something that we are known for industrially or commercially is our ambition. I mean, look at Boeing, like essentially bringing flight to the world. Look at Amazon bringing e-commerce to the world, or Starbucks bringing not just coffee. Coffee existed, right? But the idea of everybody being able to, yeah, there you go. Yeah, Costco bringing us whatever the wonderful thing is that Costco, bulk buying fast, right? All of these things, we are really pretty badass at building and scaling businesses, but our politics has been weenie. I don't know. We really, really have a certain kind of hand wringing and fear and sort of small, pokey provincial sort of thinking here. And I think it's time for us to catch up to our industrialists. And that means we need to make some investments in our future. And to do that, we have to raise the money. And there are ways to do it without hurting our economy. And this is one of them. So I'm bigly in favor of it, as our awful former president would say. So.
Yeah, it sounds like the mayor would have a partner in some space needle thinking, some big ball, and all its other metaphors for kind of the more bold, big picture kind of policy wins.
Yeah, and I mean, the mayor has talked about a lot of that, and a lot of people have criticized him for maybe not always delivering specific things that actually align with that. But I do think he wants to do it. And so I think there is an opportunity there to build a coalition of businesses and labor. I mean, obviously, some businesses are going to have a hard time with taxes, but some of them are actually in favor of investments that expand the pie for them. Labor is going to be on board. There is an opportunity, I think, to go bigger here and actually build the political tent to deliver on it. And I think if that tent were forming intact, that had something that was real space needle thinking, I think it would not be impossible to get the mayor on board. The current seat holder in my district, impossible to get him on board. But I think the mayor could get there.
What was your favorite part of the downtown activation plan, if you've had a chance to peek at that between door knocking and all that? And
So I've seen
what
that
would you
there
love
is
to
one.
see in it that's not?
This is embarrassing, but I haven't looked at it yet because it's just been days. But did it include an I-5 lid or close? It
included thinking about it, yes.
Yeah, I mean,
exploring it.
Yeah, what I would like to see. So I think we clearly need to lit. So if I'm thinking about it, let me tell you, so I can't answer the question straightforwardly because I haven't read it yet. Because
I haven't read the whole thing either yet. And
campaigning my brains out. So. But I will tell you, when I think about revitalizing downtown, once again, we know that little tax breaks aren't going to make a difference. But what will work? Well, of course, making it safe will make a difference. And we have a lot of work we could do in behavioral health, in, as I said earlier, using our resources more efficiently to shorten 911 wait times, et cetera. But also getting more eyes on the street. So, if I think about the 3 pillars for downtown, there's, offices, tourism, and housing, right? And so, offices are struggling, right? And we can do what we can to bring that back. But this is a global phenomenon, and it is sharper here, but basically it's much higher in downtowns that are tech heavy. And so that's part of what we're dealing with here. So yes, industry diversification, making downtown more attractive so that office workers want to be down there. Certainly getting daycare downtown. I know a bunch of people that would happily leave North Seattle on a daily basis if they could find daycare. So I do think there's a lot we could get office workers to go downtown without sort of paternalistically just telling them they have to. But the other 2 legs of the stool, which would, by the way, reinforce this, because they would make downtown more awesome, well, let's start with housing. So it's all the stuff we've been saying about housing, but I'll add that downtown population is at its highest ever. And I think we could do a lot to double down there and to make it more of a complete community, more grocery, get a K-8 school at least down there. And I know that seems crazy when schools are closing, but there is a lot of population down there being shipped out. And especially if we can make it a family-friendly place, that'd be excellent. A library in South Lake Union is something I've seen on a lot of people's wish lists. And then parks. We've really bombed it on parks. So lidding I-5, we obviously did not make wise decisions on the waterfront. But once again, we do have certain spots downtown that could be turned into parks that are currently right-of-way. And especially as we use that right-of-way more efficiently, especially as we're building light rail, especially as we're bringing more rapid rides online, we really do have the opportunity to create more do more placemaking downtown. And that's going to make it so more people want to live down there, which between that and good lighting, we know also reduces crime because of eyes on the street, and lighting reduces eyes on the street. And then again, this is going to make it more attractive of a tourist place. I do think I'd like us to see us up level our museum game a little bit too, although that's not the very top of my list. And then kind of one last thing is I am for the city center connector, or the streetcar, or as Greg Spots is calling it, the cultural connector, both because redundancy in transit is good, and because attractive, beautiful transit is good, and because if we have a downtown revitalization problem, doing things that people go, ooh, that's awesome, I want to build stuff next to it, I want to live next to it, I want to see it, I want to ride it, is a very, very good idea. And so that's the kind of stuff I think about when I think about downtown revitalization. And by the way, the good news is some of the public investments involved in that will attract a lot of private capital for investment alongside it, right? Maybe not in the project itself, but right next door. benefit from its benefits. So.
Great. Yeah, the streetcar is also in the plan, and obviously some of these are more unfunded than others, including the live in the streetcar. But the mayor's vision's still there, so I think he'll be glad to have council members who are good at finding ways to get it done, both funding and being willing to sweat out some of the pushback that may come when whatever this parking or just generally being a curmudgeon about change in other ways.
I actually want to say something about that.
Yeah,
so
go for
I
that.
think it's important for council to listen, and I think particularly to listen to find new information. But when it's such a small percentage of people that show up, and it tends to be a self-selecting group of people with more means, not always, but with more means that show up to council and advocate, I think it really distorts a lot of our leaders' sense of what the populace wants. And I think that's why I'm trying to run with a really clear set of values, really clear kinds of policies I am trying to enact, so that if people do vote me in, I know what my voters want, and 30 people showing up can't cancel out the voices of 20,000 who voted. And I think it is important for us to try to not to listen and to empathize and to get new information out of communities, but to not let that distort our sense of what the population at large wants, and to look at better indicators of what the population wants.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's good to hear, refreshing to hear folks aren't just going to ping pong back and forth based on what the last person to yell at them in a public meeting is. We want you to listen, but we don't want you to lose sight of that bigger picture. We've been focusing on housing and transportation, but obviously you've alluded to how safety and homelessness are issues that are very top of mind for folks, and you've addressed some of that in some of your answers, even as we've talked about other things. And certainly adding more housing is a good long-term solution. But what do you say to folks who are saying, what are you going to do in the more immediate term on those issues? How do we address those in the shorter term?
Yeah, so a lot of people amalgamate these in funny ways. So I think even though there's some overlap, I break this into like homelessness, like crime, and drug use, which depending on maybe your ideas, are more or less overlapping depending. So let's save homelessness for last for a second, because that's especially complicated. But I can easily just tie into some things I've said earlier. But on crime, so this is crime apart from drug use, right? Which is its own discussion. One is as you mentioned, getting people housed, things like this will prevent crime, giving people real opportunity, but that takes a long time. So the short-term things we can be doing, there's the sort of Swiss cheese public health approach to gun violence. The Alliance for Gun Responsibility does a lot of advocacy work around this. So community violence intervention programming, which actually interrupts violence, kind of typically in that 15 to 30-year-old male population, that lots of testosterone and less prefrontal cortex for most of those years, that does most of the shooting. And having been one of those 15 to 30-year-old males, I understand how short-sighted we can be. They're very good at slowing down violence in those groups, and they need more support at the city level. On top of prevention, though, when I think about our emergency response, we are 362 sworn officers down, and right now we do need to be able to be responsive. Our police need to be able to be responsive when they need to be, but that was a tautology, excuse me. They need to be able to be responsive when there's a crisis, but we need to also be realistic about what can be done with hiring. So Bellevue, Tacoma, Olympia, they're all saying they have a hiring crisis. Now, 85% of jurisdictions in Washington are below their peak number of officers. Memphis is down 25%. Tulsa is down 20%. Suburban Atlanta, Gwinnett County is down 27%. Now, Seattle's down 27%. Too. We are kind of at one end of the curve, but we're not even off the curve, right? But there's this kind of local mythology that because the Seattle City Council ruined everything, that now that's why we don't have police. And some of the statements they said may have moved us along that curve, and maybe we can do better, but we can't do magic and make the police hiring market nationally change. So what can we do? Well, SPD has told us what we can do. If we stick with the plan they have right now and the bonuses and the marketing and all that, we can net about 30 officers in the next budget cycle, which is 1/12 of the deficit. So if that's true, we need to have a plan to get 911 times down that doesn't involve doing magic. So for me, that means I mentioned earlier, traffic enforcement. It's a great way to release a lot of time that officers are tied up unnecessarily. Similar with directing traffic at events, that often is paid for by third parties, like, the Mariners or whatever. But in some cities, they allow flaggers to do that. We should be letting them do that. They shouldn't have to show up every time someone administers Narcan for an overdose. That's another big source of wasted time. So you can start to narrow that aperture. And then, of course, the big one that everybody's been talking about for years, but nobody's been delivering, is actually scaling up a behavioral health crisis response, like Denver, like Albuquerque, like Eugene. Even SPD, which is famously conservative about this, says 12% of calls at 911 are triageable to behavioral health only response. And other folks have looked at that data and said it's 49%. Whatever the number is, it's a lot, and we could save on thousands of calls. So we can also increase police responsiveness very quickly, which is really important. And then I also think we need to be addressing accountability. So right now we do have a problem with legitimacy in our policing in the city. And some of it, it's often blamed by, on sort of activist culture. But the truth is our police department has had some pretty bad behavior, so much so that the Justice Department had to parachute in and say, wow, you've got some unusually bad behavior. And they've really struggled to fix it. And so one of the biggest challenges, we don't have good governance. We don't have good accountability and oversight. It needs to be made independent. That independent body needs to be able to have full transparency, which means subpoena power, and they need to be able to offer disciplinary action, right? Full disciplinary action. And so, I think taking those steps and then funding recidivism prevention, essentially the kinds of treatment that work for folks that are in the criminal legal system are the sort of best, fastest set of things we can be doing to increase safety in our public spaces. So that's a long answer, but it's the truth. And then the other piece is drugs. We just had this hearing. There was all these big feelings. I thought it was very interesting to see that when all the scientists and public health folks and professors came out and said, hey, we've been studying this for years. We have great data. We know it works. We know it doesn't. Sarah Nelson put her AirPods in. Is the equivalent of a council member sitting up on the dais saying la, 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 and not great behavior. The truth is we do know what works. We know that if we want to get drugs off the street, we know that if we want to reduce overdose deaths, and we know that if we want to get people into treatment, there's really one path to that. And that's saying, hey, you can't do drugs on the street, but you can do them in this medically supervised overdose prevention space, right? That reduces drug deaths precipitously in those spaces. It makes enforcing something like a no smoking ban realistic, because a person who is addicted to opiates can't decide to just not use, but they can decide to walk down the street into a safe space. And it happens to mean that those people then are in a concentrated space where they are interacting with social workers and medical professionals who are trained to identify the moment of readiness where that person is likely to be successful in treatment and get them into treatment. That model has been very successful elsewhere, and we need to adopt it. It will get our streets clean the fastest for the people that are concerned about that. It will save the most lives for the people that are concerned about that. And it will also not waste a bunch of resources, because right now we've got a set of folks trying to advocate for our city attorney to be able to direct enforcement resources toward that. Well, we have a finite number of enforcement resources. They're having trouble keeping up with sex offenders and murderers. And so to move them to doing something that doesn't work for people who are having drug overdose issues seems like a really bad idea to me.
That was really thorough, as I've come to expect from you. And we are a little over the hour, so I will wrap up, but I wanted to give you a chance for anything you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to, or a final word if you wanted to.
Yeah, so look, I am doing this because I love my community. I'm doing this because I got really lucky and I want to pay it forward. And I think it's terrible that people can't start a life successfully here unless they inherit wealth and social class. I'm doing this because I care about the climate, and cities play a huge role in addressing, preventing, and preparing for climate change. And I have children. And I'm also the only candidate that hasn't recently been caught either giving money to Republicans or brought in by the chamber to get them a $200 million tax cut. So I hope that people know that, understand that, and know that I'm going to bring a lot of energy, a lot of wonkishness, and a lot of deal-making experience to the council. And I think we can build a progressive, thoughtful, urbanist majority and really get stuff done in the city.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for folks who are either tuning in now or going to catch it later, we will let you get back to it, but check out the website if you want to learn more, which
Thank
is
you. Seattle4ron.com.
yeah, there you go.
We have vouchers. And by the way, Urbanist community, it's getting to be that hot time of year where we are knocking doors like crazy. Volunteers. My urbanist volunteers are my hardest core, and I would really love to see more of you out there with me.
Excellent. And thanks to Seattle Subway who helped put this together.
Yeah, thank you.